Today's daf we're going to be learning is Gittin Daf Nun Aleph. We're going to start at the very bottom with a quick review of Nun Amud Bet. We saw at the end, okay, so I have a field. I stole it from you. I sold it. Hopefully I'm going with the same names. I sold it to Cindy. And then what happened? In the meantime, I sold it to Cindy and I said, listen, if there's any problem with this, I'm responsible. Then I went and I sold more property to Miriam. Miriam knew that I had a lien on that property. So when you come and collect your field from Cindy, Cindy goes to me. And if I don't have land, she could go collect from Miriam for her field. But what can't she collect from Miriam? The payroll. If there were proceeds that came to her after that she or produce from the field, she can't demand that from Miriam. Okay, that's what we're talking about. To which we saw two answers. Ula said in the name of Rish Lakish, which was also said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because it wasn't written in the contract that I'm responsible for the produce. I was just saying I'm responsible for the land. So therefore, when Miriam bought land for me, she knew that I was responsible for this land, but she didn't know I was responsible for the produce. You can't expect her to pay for that. And Rabbi Hanina says, no, it's because there's no set amount. Produce could be a ton. And no one would ever sell in their right mind if no one would ever buy, if they know that someone could come and claim, right, money at Ein Sof, infinity, right? It would be crazy. So therefore, to make sure that people actually buy land, otherwise I'll never be able to sell my land. So we say basically, don't worry, you're protected. No one's going to come and claim, we say to the buyer, no one's going to come and claim things that could be infinite. To which the Gemara asks, last line of Nun Amud Bet, does he mean it has to be a set amount and it has to be written in the contract? Or does he mean only katsuv? Once there's a set amount, then you're allowed to actually collect from lien property. So that's the question in what Rabbi Hanina says. We don't know, does he mean he's adding on to the previous, or is he saying only suvim? That's the only criteria. And as long as it's katsuv, then yes, you can collect from lien property. Tashma, let's try to learn from here. We're going to quote a machloka between two Amoraim, and one of them is going to be Rabbi Hanina, and we're going to try to infer from here to our case. To Itmar was said, somebody dies, leaves two daughters and a son. Now what happens? The son gets the inheritance. The daughters each are entitled to 10% of the property to demand for their dowry. So, the first daughter gets married, she takes a tenth of her property for her dowry. But the second one never took the money because she didn't get married yet. And the next thing happened, not that she never gets married, but by the time she got around to it, she hadn't yet taken it, and the son dies. So now what happens? The inheritance gets split between the two daughters. So the question is, do we first give her the 10, just equal to what the other daughter had, and then split it 50-50? So each will end up with a tenth, and then 40-40, and then they'll each have 50%. Or do we say, no, at this point, she didn't get her dowry, but she didn't demand it. So at this point, we're going to just split what's left, which is 90%. Split it 50-50. One gets 45, and the other one gets 55, because she's already got her 10% from before, plus the other 45. So which way do we go? For that, there's going to be a machloket. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, shniya bitra. The second one lost her rights, meaning she only gets the 45%. The other one gets the 55 because she didn't ask for the nedunya money. Amar le Rabbi Hanina, G'dol. So Rabbi Hanina says to him, "What are you talking about? They even say more than what is going on in this case, meaning, of course, the second one should get her money. It should be split 50-50 because dowries in general have a lot of power to collect. What does that mean? Well, he says to him, if, let's say, there's no assets of the father, he's sold them all, and he dies. So now, do the sons, when the daughters need parnasah, which is their dowry, or money for food, can they go collect it from lien property? Okay, so now the question is, can we take it from lien property or not? Can they go and demand and say to let's say the orphans, let's take an example. The orphans have property, they sold it. And now the girls said, what do you mean? We need our food. We need our, right? So can they go demand the food from the property that the orphans sold? So it says here, Then when it comes to the dowry, yes. When it comes to the mizonot, the food, no, they can't. So what do you see here? Dowry has a lot of power. You can collect it from nechasim mishuabadim. So if you can collect it from lien property, which is the whole point of why we read this, what do you see here? He says you can collect your dowry money from lien property. So we'll get back to this in a minute. And he says, but how could you possibly say then the second one loses her rights to the dowry? Of course you can collect the dowry first and then split the inheritance. Now, what does this have to do with our point? Well, a dowry is a set amount as opposed to mizonot, and that's exactly the difference. The food they can't get from lien property because whoever bought the land wasn't going to commit to, oh, I'll give food to your family members for the rest of their lives. But when it comes to the dowry, that was something that was already committed to them from the lien property. So yes. Now, why is that? Because now here we're going to see. It was never written anywhere that they have rights to a dowry, but it is a set amount because it's 1/10 of their property. So there is a set amount on it. V'kamotzian, what do you see? You could take it from nechasim shuabadim, lien property. So what do they answer? Oh no, don't prove it from here. Because what's the whole issue? When someone goes to buy the land that has a lien on it, do they know that it has a lien and do they know what their rights are? Do they know what will be? And the whole issue of writing it was that they need to know. Here it says they don't need to. But what do they say? Now, shane parnasa. A dowry is different. Everybody knows that you have a dowry for your daughter. It's something that gets around. You're going to give a dowry to your daughter. So therefore, it's as if it's written. So that doesn't prove to us. And as we wanted to show that Rabbi Hanina only requires katsuv and not katuv because it's not written here. But they basically say this case is like it's written, and therefore it doesn't prove anything. We're going to go back to this idea of things having the same status as if it was written, because the whole idea of being written is just to get to an ends, which is people will know. So if you could get to it some other way without it being written, then it's still the same. It's basically equivalent to writing. And then it doesn't prove anything about what Rabbi Hanina holds. So we don't really know. Does he require also the set amount and also written, or just the set amount not being written? Mativ Rav Huna bar Manah. He now asks the question, definitely against Ula, possibly also against Rabbi Hanina. Metu. Okay, now we're in a weird case. There's a woman who has a child from a different marriage. Her husband's not around anymore. We don't know why, but she's not married anymore. She comes into a new marriage with that daughter. And she says to the husband, listen, commit to me that you're going to feed this daughter. And presumably you're going to feed any daughters that we have in the future. But commit to me also that you're going to feed this daughter that I brought into the marriage for 5 years. Then she gets divorced from him. But he committed the 5 years. He has to still pay her the 5 years. Within those 5 years, she marries someone else. And she makes him make the same commitment that he's going to feed the daughter for 5 years. At this point, the Mishnah in Ketubot says the first husband has to pay them, or one of them pays them the food. And then the other husband pays the value of the food in money because she doesn't need double the amount of food. So she gets that money because he committed to it. Now we're going to go on to what happens if Metu. In the Mishnah it says, if both men die, then we basically are going to end up with daughters of theirs with the wife and daughters the woman brought in before who she made them commit to pay the money. So now we're going to see that there's a difference. Like we said before, food, the girls are going to get, his regular daughters, all his daughters are going to get food, including his daughters with this wife, are going to get food from only free property, not lien property. But this daughter who he promised that he would feed for 5 years, she actually gets to collect money from lien property. Why is that? Because she's like someone who's owed money because there's a commitment he has to her. So what do you see here? That it's not written anywhere because we didn't say that he wrote a written agreement. And it's not a set amount because it's food, which could be endless now. And then it would be a question on both. Possibly you could argue the other way, which is this dafka proves Rabbi Hanina against Ula because this is a set amount because it's only for 5 years. So there's a debate about whether we think food supplements for 5 years is a set amount or food is a non-set amount. You know, she could 1 year eat not a lot of food, the next year she could eat a ton of food, she could have a growth spurt, all sorts of reasons why it might not be a set amount. In any case, we don't know if it's a question on Rabbi Hanina or not, but it's definitely a question on Ula. So now they say, because it wasn't written at all, to which they answer, like they answered before, she did a kinyan when she made this agreement about the daughters. Again, now we're going to talk in a minute that agreement about the daughters was really all the daughters. Number one, you'll feed that daughter for 5 years, and also you'll feed my future daughters that we have together. in the case of death or whatever, that you commit to them. That's just in general what we do in marriage. But we'll get back to that in a minute. So now we're going to assume she did a kinyan with him about the food for the daughter. So basically, because it was a kinyan, it's as if it was written. Another case of it's like it was written. So now they say, what's a kinyan, right? We did some sort of acquiring action. Ihachi benot nami. Well, if she did a kinyan, then it should apply also to her daughters with him. Why can't they get them from the chasim mishuabadim if there was a kinyan? So they say, b'shkanu lezo v'lo kanu lezo. Presumably she did a kinyan about that, and she didn't do a kinyan about the other daughters. To which they say, my Pascha, why on earth would she do a kinyan about one and not about the other? If she wanted to do a kinyan to make it serious and make it that they could get from the lien property, then she should have done it across the board. So they say, no, really, she did one kinyan, and it should have gone for both. But what? Bat Ishto, the daughter of the wife that was existing, dehavi b'shat kinyan, mahanila kinyan. She was alive at the time of the kinyan. That was the whole point. She came from a different marriage. The kinyan works for her. But the fact that he made her commit to future daughters that didn't exist at the time, they weren't there alive at the time of the kinyan. Lo mahanila kinyan. She did one kinyan that theoretically should have gone for everything, but it just doesn't apply to people who aren't in existence. To which the Gemara doesn't like that answer, because they say, what do you mean? Mila askina davi travaya b'shat kinyan. Well, what if they were both around at the time of the kinyan? Behechidami, how could that possibly be? Aren't they talking about daughters, right? There's a difference between his daughters with her and her daughters with a different person. They're only getting married now. How could they possibly have daughters from it before? So, said Digarsha Hadran. Theoretically, they're not saying this is the case, but theoretically, in other words, because it doesn't distinguish, is it a remarriage or is it a first marriage? It seems like any daughters that they share, whether they were from the first time they were married, which, right, we're now adding that this one was married 4 times, but okay. So basically, if they had kids from a previous time and then they got remarried, okay, so let's say she married husband number 1, they had a daughter, she got divorced, she marries husband number 2, he commits to her the first daughter, right? And then he commits to her also future daughters. Then they get divorced. Then she marries husband number 3. She's still getting the money from the first one for the daughter from the previous marriage, right? The first marriage. Then she marries the second guy. She makes him commit. Then they get divorced and then they get remarried. And they had kids in that divorce. So when she makes him commit on the 4th marriage of hers now. So, and again, it's unrealistic that this really happened, but what they're saying is theoretically, it doesn't seem like there would be any distinction. The distinction is not were they alive or weren't they alive. The distinction is which daughters came from a different marriage and which daughters are his daughters. So therefore, the distinction of, well, the answer that they weren't alive and the kinyan therefore didn't go to them isn't necessarily the case, because it could be they were alive. So we're still trying to figure this out, why we make this distinction between the two. To which they answer, Milo, what's the difference really between she did a kinyan and theoretically it should have applied across the board, but what? The daughter who's coming from out of the marriage is irrelevant to him. So the only reason it works that he has to feed her is because of the kinyan. So the kinyan's effective. But the daughters that he's going to have with her going down the road, or daughters he had with her previously, it doesn't make a difference. He's responsible for them because of its T'nai Beitin. The Beitin basically said husbands have to take care of their daughters, especially in death, right? From the estate, we feed the daughters. So you don't need a kinyan for that because it's such a done deal that even if you don't do it, the court can obligate you. So therefore, the kinyan didn't go on that at all. So she did a kinyan that theoretically could have gone on all, but it's not effective if you don't need it. To which they answer, right? And then they continue. Bat ishto de la b'tnai beitin kach lemahani la kinyan. But the daughter of the wife who came from a different marriage isn't part of this stipulation of the court, and therefore the kinyan works for her. But they still don't like this. They're now going to say there's still something wrong about this. V'chi migra gara. We're going to make it worse because there's a t'nai beitin. We're now going to say, well, you did a kinyan, but the kinyan didn't apply to that. It only applies to that daughter. And we're going to make it worse for the people who are the obvious ones who should be getting the money. And we're not going to let them collect from lien property because we're going to say the kinyan didn't work because there was no need for it. So her situation is actually worse because it was part of the court stipulation. That's ridiculous. So they reject this whole idea. And they basically say the following. Really, so now we're going to say the following. Elabita, what's the difference between the daughter and the other daughter? Okay, the daughter from the previous marriage. There he committed, and she can collect from lien property. the reason why his daughters can't collect from lien property is because this is something we've seen before, both in Gittin and in Ketubot, that there's a concern that because he has to give her this money, maybe he decided to give her the money when she was still alive, right? It's a commitment that when you, right, it's kind of like it's in an escrow account for her with her name on it. So maybe he'll take some out and give it to her at some point. So therefore, we don't let her take it from lien property because there's no way to know if he paid her back the money or not. So we don't give her that much power to take this money because it's money that's so given to her that maybe he even gave it to her in her lifetime. And that's okay. So that's this issue. In the end, what have we done? We started with trying to ask this question about Rabbi Chanina when he says ktuvim. Does he mean ktuvim and ktuvim? We couldn't figure that out. Then we brought a question for Rav Huna bar Manoach from this Mishnah in Ketubot. We tried to say that seems to show that even if it's not written, even if it's not set, or maybe not, we don't know, but maybe it still seems to work, to which they answered there was a kinyan. We had a bunch of questions. How does that kinyan work and why wouldn't it work for the other daughters? But we resolved that. Okay, back to our two opinions here. And now we're going to have a question against both of them, really. Okay, there's a bit of a debate about how to understand this Gemara. I'm going to go with Rashi. Tashma. Now we're going to bring a Tannaitic source. So there was an Amoraitic debate about why we do this. But now we're going to see an opinion of Rabbi Natan, who's a Tana, who doesn't go by either of them. And then we're going to say, how can the Amoraim say this if the Tana says something else entirely? Ematai. When does this whole thing work that you can't take from the lien property? It sounds complicated, but it's very easy if we go back to our example. I sold the land, my second property. First, I sold my first property to Cindy, the stolen one. Then I sold my second property to Miriam. And only after I sold to Miriam did Cindy start investing in the first property. Okay, so if when I sold the land to Miriam, Cindy's property was just property and it didn't have all these produce in it, then Miriam knew that, right, then you can't take that from Miriam. But if when I sold the land to Miriam, already Cindy invested in the property and it was already worth a lot more money, then again, Miriam should have known the value of the property and known going into the deal when she bought the house from me. And therefore, theoretically, goveh min nechasim shu'abadim. Or not theoretically. Rabbi Natan says yes. In that case, you can actually be goveh. So what do you see here? Alma mishum delo kadimhu. The whole issue is what happened first. And the reason our Mishnah must say you can't collect is only because he invested. First, he sold the property, and then the other person invested. And it happened after, and that's why you can't collect it from the nechasim shu'abadim. And that has nothing to do with ksuvim or ketuvim. To which the Gemara answers, don't worry about Rabbi Natan's opinion, Tanaihi, because it's a machloka between Tanaim. There's three opinions. There's Rabbi Natan, and then we're going to see two other Tannaitic opinions, and each of the two Tannaitic opinions are going to fit with Ula and Rabbi Chanina. Then we could just say Ula and Rabbi Chanina each held by one of these Tanaim. Ditanya, Ein motziin lachilat peroru shavach karkaot, Ula mazoni shava banot min nechasim shobadim. Exactly our Mishnah, right? This Breita starts off like our Mishnah. You can't collect the payroll, the sheva, the benefits of the land, or the money for food supplements for the wife and children from lien property. Mipnei tikkun olam, because of tikkun olam, and here it adds lefi she'enam ktuvim, because they're not written down. There you have it. That's Ula. Amar Rabbi Yossi, what does that help us? It still could be endless. Even if it was written, it could still be endless, and that would be a problem. So he seems to say the issue is ksuvim, and therefore we see machloket Tanaim. That's the end of that sugya. We've already kind of reviewed it, so I'm going to leave it at that. Right? We had what Rabbi Chanina really holds, the ksuvim and ktuvim, or just ksuvim. Then we had which we couldn't resolve. We had the difficulty against possibly only Ula, or maybe Ula and Rabbi Chanina. We resolved it because it was done with a kinyan, and then we brought up this other Breita with Rabbi Natan and has a third approach, and then we say, oh, don't worry about that. That's just a different, right? We thought maybe it's the only approach. So no. In the time of the Tanaim, there were actually three approaches, and these two rabbis chose two. They ignored Rabbi Natan's opinion. Now we move to the next part of the Mishnah. If you find a lost item, you don't take an oath. But they wanted to make it better for people to return so that they won't start making them take oaths. What kind of oaths? We're going to talk about it. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak now comes and says something that we're going to see seems to go against our Mishnah, because he's going to say people who find lost items do have to sometimes take an oath. Well, he distinguishes cases. If you claim that I lost 2 wallets and they were tied together and you found them, and I say, I said, what are you talking about? I only found one. Nishba. I have to take an oath. In a minute, we're going to see why. You claim I found 2 oxen of yours tied together. And I said there was only one. I don't have to swear. Why not? My time. If you claim that these were tied together and they were inanimate objects, then there's no reason to think that they got untied. So if I found one, I presumably found 2. And if I say I only found one, I must be lying. But if it was animals, the animals could break apart and run off. So there's no reason to assume that they were still together when I found them. However, if you say, Shnei shvarim kshurim matzata, you say, hey, Michelle, you found 2 oxen. I know that they were together. V'hala omer matzati, and I say, yes, I did find. However, but don't you remember last week I returned one of them? This is what we call modeh b'miktzah. I admit to half the claim. I actually admitted to the whole claim, but then basically said I already gave back half. This is what we call admitting to half a claim. And if you do that, you have to take an oath, even in a case of a mitzvah, of a lost item. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak, lately, don't we have a principle that if you find something lost, you don't have to swear? Because otherwise, why would I return you the one if you're going to start claiming I owe you 2? So now we're starting from the next Amud. In order to explain Rabbi Yitzchak, we're going to have to say he also like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What we're going to basically claim is that, and it's a little bit complicated, so I'm going to set it up from the beginning. Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Tana, Yitzchak's and Amora, he holds like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who basically they both hold that if someone claims a definitive claim against you, which could likely be true, like my 2 wallets were tied up together as opposed to the oxen, which could have broken apart. But if you make a claim that's definitive and I claim no, right, only part, then I have to take an oath. Okay? So now, and the rabbis are going to say, no, I don't. Okay, and why is that the case? When it comes even to a mitzvah, right, a lost item. Tanya. So first, let's try to see where we see their opinions, and then we're going to explain it. It's going to take us the whole Amud here. It's not a long one, but the whole Amud to explain. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Now we're not talking about a case of a lost item, but you'll see they're going to connect it to lost items. What is a lost item? It's something that you wouldn't have really gotten back otherwise. So sometimes people swear on their own claim. That means I can make a claim that it sounds like no one made a counterclaim. Nobody said you owe me money. And I come forward and say something, and I could actually have to take an oath on that. What is that? Ketzad. Manela avicha biyadi, ve'achalti pras harei nishba. If I say, your father's dead now, but he actually gave me 100 shekels to watch, and I already returned half, and here's the other half. I have to swear. V'zeu shenishba tanat atzmo. And that's an example where I would take an oath because of my own admitting. Now, this doesn't really make any sense, and we're going to try to figure out in the Gemara what could possibly be. There must be something missing here, because really it doesn't make sense. I would have to do that. And Chachamim have the more obvious answer, which is Chachamim will believe, Eino ela k'meshiva v'edao patur. This is like returning a lost item, because the kids had no idea there was a loan, obviously. They didn't come and claim anything against me. So by me coming forward and saying it, it's basically like returning a lost item. So of course I don't have to take an oath. Nobody who finds a lost item has to take an oath to return a lost item. So of course I don't have to, I say there was 100, I paid you back half, but what's the difference that we don't have proof that I paid you half? You wouldn't have been able to claim anything on me anyway, so it's like returning a lost item. So now we have to figure out, well, there's Ben Yaakov, because lately Mishiv Avida Patur, it sounds like the Chachamim have the right way to go here. Amarav, B'toano Katan. Rav says there must have been a counterclaim. It's just it was done by a minor. In other words, the orphans were minors. They claimed I owed them 100. I said, you're right, I owed you 100, but I gave back 50 already. Okay, right? You're right that I took out a loan from your father for 100, but I paid him back 50. To which the Gemara says, Katan mi d'mashashi ipe. How can you say it was a katan? We don't pay attention to a katan. We don't take oaths if a katan or a deaf mute or a shoteh comes to us. We don't. Those are people who don't have halachic knowledge. They're not considered knowledgeable people. We don't take their claims seriously, and therefore we don't take an oath if they claim we owe them. To which the Gemara says, now when Rav said B'tono Katan, what he really meant was my Katan Gadol. He really meant Gadol. Now, my Kari Le Katan, it's a little strange. If he meant not a minor anymore, someone who came of age, why would you call him a Katan? Well, in this instance, he's like a Katan because de lagabe mile de avid Katanu. He's making a claim that's a definitive one, but it's based on what he knows from his father. And most kids don't really know exactly what was going on in their father's financial life, even if they're older, it doesn't make a difference. So Gadol, who's an orphan and is telling about his father's claims, is really considered like a Katan. To which they say, okay, so let's punch that into the story. Let's assume the whole case, not the story, but the case was sometimes Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says you can have to swear, take an oath based on your own claim, like this case. Now, we just said the cases where we just explained it's not your own claim. Someone who was a gadol had a counterclaim on you. So ihachi tanat atzmo, tanat achirim, it's not tanat atzmo, it's not your own claim. It's someone else claimed against you. So you can't say that's the case. Change the wording. Tanat achirim v'odat atzmo. It's a case where Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying sometimes you could have a case where somebody claims something against you and you admit to part and you'll have to swear based on your admission. To which the Gemara says, okay, we're missing something here. This is not unique. This is every case of Moda b'Miktzad is that. Kulu ta'anta nami tanat achirim v'odat atzmoninu. Every single case of Moda b'Miktzad, it sounds like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying something is unique here. And it clearly is because the rabbis disagree with it. So it can't possibly be that someone came with a counterclaim who was not a minor. He said, you're right about half. I don't know you the other half. It's exactly the same as any Moda b'Miktzad case. So we're missing something here. So Gemara says, okay, fine, forget that. It's the wrong way to go. They're obviously arguing about something else. And Rashi says here, even though it doesn't say so in the Gemara, that we're really talking about where a minor claimed something, because it has to be, otherwise it makes no sense to compare it to our previous case, which we haven't gotten back to the comparison yet of Rabbi Yitzchak. But what we're going to say is the minor comes with the claim, I know you owe my father money. Now they're a minor. And Rashi says, even though we say you don't swear to minors, you do if they're coming with their father's claim. Okay, that's the important thing here. And now the question is, what happens here? So Rabbah says the following, and now we're going to get to this is the basis always whenever they talk about Moda b'Miktzad, this is how Moda b'Miktzad works. It's a little confusing and it's based on different stages. And what's fascinating about it is it's trying to get into the minds of people. When we want to know if someone's lying or telling the truth, we have to kind of go through what would be a typical way of thinking. You tell me whether this is typical or not, but let's think. Why do we make you take an oath if you admitted to half of a claim? So they say the following, right? Here comes the guy. He says, you owe me, okay? You come to me, you say you owe me money. Now, you let me money. I admit that you let me money. I don't deny that. I just claim that I paid you back half. So now the question is, what's going through my mind? So there's a principle, which is we just assume human behavior, that we can assume that nobody would have the chutzpah, the audacity, to go in front of someone who loaned them money and say, I don't owe you anything. Okay, that would be crazy. So it's not really a lie I could do, which means that I really want to lie and deny the entire thing because I don't have the money to pay you back. But the fact that I'm not denying the whole thing is only because what we just said. I would never deny in front of your face and say, you didn't lend me money. That would be crazy. You did something so nice for me, and now I'm going to lie in your face? No way, no how. Therefore, we get back to the other side now. So I wouldn't lie. So what would I do? Well, the next stage is, so once I come to the conclusion that I can't lie under your face, I really want to admit that I owe you everything. But what? So why didn't I? And the assumption is when I said I only owe you 50, is because I'm just trying to really push you off. In other words, I will eventually admit that I owe you 100. So right now I just say, yeah, you let me 100, but I already paid you back 50 because I just want to push you off a little. I'm just pushing you off because I know eventually I'll get the money and I'll pay you back. So since I can't lie to your face, so I'll fetch my lie. I'll say, well, I owe you, you're right, you won't pay me all this money, but I paid you half, which really just means, it's just another way of saying, I don't really want to pay you the money today because I don't have it. Well, comes the Torah, and they see right through me, and they say, Amar Rachmana, the Torah says, we assume that I'm lying about the other 50. Okay? And therefore, the Torah says you got to take an oath. If you really claim that you pay back 50, then swear under oath, right? Make an oath, which I'm not going to do if I really, right? I might lie to you a little bit to your face, but not if I have to swear in the name of God about it. So therefore, they make me swear so that I'll end up really admitting to the whole thing, right? And I'll say, oh, forget it. I won't take the oath. I'll just pay you the whole thing. That's what they're hoping is going to happen. So now we have to still understand, though, why do we have this debate, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis? That's a classic case of Moda b'miktzah. So now we're going to say, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov saval, lo shna bo, lo shna b'bno, eno meis. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, there's no distinction in terms of this, ein adam meis panav b'fnei baal chavot. This is going to hold true 100% for the person and for the son. Just like I wouldn't have chutzpah to say to someone who helped me, I don't owe you any money. I would, by the same token, not be able to lie to his son. However, and therefore, hilkach lam meshiv avedahu. And therefore, this isn't a case of meshiv avedah, because we assume that I'm telling the truth about the 50. We assume that really I owe 100. So the assumption is, this isn't a meshiv avedah. It's not like you wouldn't have gotten the money anyway. Really, you deserve all the money. And we're just making me swear because we think I'm trying to get out of the other 50. That's not like meshiv avedah. That's not like giving back a lost item. And then we're going to compare that to our case. How so? Before we get to Rabbanit. That's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That's just like if I say, here's one wallet, and you say, but I know there's two. If someone's coming up against you with a definitive claim and you make a partial claim, basically, we're going to make you take an oath, even if it's a lost item, because we assume that you're lying, really. Comes the rabbis, and they say, we're not assuming you're lying here. Rabbanan savle, bohu de'eno meis, aval b'bno meis. We assume that you wouldn't lie to the person who gave you the money, but the son doesn't know you. You don't know the son. You would lie in front of his face, which means what? Which means if I really, really wanted to lie, I would have just said, I don't owe you anything. So now, midelo meis, from the fact that I wasn't brazen enough to lie about everything, then mishiv avedahu. Now it's the reverse. Now the burden of proof really is on you, because why? We assume that if I really wanted to lie, I would have lied about the entire thing. The fact that I didn't means that it's possible there's no way really for you to claim that I owe you money. Because theoretically, you could have said you owe me, and I could have said I didn't, and there'd be no way to prove who's right. So the fact that I admit to half is basically like returning something that I never really needed to return. And therefore, it's like meshiv avedah, and that's why I don't have to take an oath according to the rabbis. So that's where this debate ends, basically, where we end up saying that Rabbi Yitzchak, basically, he's not going against the explicit Mishnah. He's just holding like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who basically says that in a case where there's a definitive claim against you, we're basically going to make you take an oath, even if you're someone returning a lost item. Whereas the rabbis don't seem to hold by that. Okay, so that was the second part of today's daf, which was these three statements of Rabbi Yitzchak and trying to figure out why in two of them, someone who returns a lost item really needs to take an oath. If the Mishnah seems pretty clear, they don't. To which we explained to him like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Wishing everybody a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.